The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello and welcome to today's Visionary Network webinar. My name is Janet Harkin and I'm delighted to welcome so many of you here this afternoon. This webinar is titled Multi-Agency Services and Welfare Reform, a Burning Bridge of Opportunity. And on the screen in front of you, you will see the speakers today. But before I introduce our speakers, just a little bit of housekeeping, just while we wait for a few more stragglers to join us. If I introduce you to the panel on the right-hand side, I'd like to do a quick audio check, if I may. Hopefully you'll be able to see a place where you can raise your digital hand. So if you could do that for me right now, just so that we can know that you can hear us all okay, that would be great. And while you're doing that, I'd just like to let you know that please ask questions in the same panel. Just ask questions as and when they come to you throughout the recording, throughout the webinar. And there'll be time at the end for us to go through the questions. And we'll either pick up the questions that people have typed in as we've gone through, or you can raise your hand at the end there. We're going to have you on your way. We aim to finish by 1:30, and also just to let you know that we're recording the session as well, so we'll be sending that out to you afterwards, so you can share with your colleagues or refer back. So thank you very much, everybody. I take it that that you can all hear me okay, and that leads me to introduce our speakers for today. So we have Malcolm Gardner from the Welfare Reform Club and Giovanni Tonutti from Policy and Practice. Malcolm is a founding member. Many of you will know Malcolm, who's a founding member of the Welfare Reform Club and a co-founder of Visionary Network, which is a part of the Welfare Reform Club that provides regular online seminars for benefit professionals. Since 1996, Malcolm worked as a manager within local authority revs and bends departments, and then as a business consultant. He's known for his pioneering work and successfully transformed several revenue and benefits teams into smarter services offering real value for money. He wrote the LGA's fraud book and was the first to use data matching to find potential fraud and introduce collaborative cross-agency working. And he was also instrumental in setting up the first fraud hotlines as well. And Malcolm currently works on projects about the economics of welfare, the demographic makeup of welfare claimants, behavioural change and channel shift. And in addition, he also still works as an appeals officer for both local authorities and housing associations. So a busy man, as I'm sure you'll agree. Indeed, as is Giovanni Tonutti, he's a lead analyst at Policy and Practice, which is a social consulting and software business set up to help make government policy simple to understand so people can move towards financial independence. And Giovanni is going to talk to you. He's worked on over 15 local authority projects to understand the cumulative and aggregate impact of welfare policy on individual households, often working with data sets from multi-agency sources to do so. So that's an introduction to our speakers, and with that, I'm now going to hand you over to Malcolm, who's going to kick off the presentations. Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you very much, Janet. Yeah, it's good to see so many of you here. Those of you looking at the screen and are thinking that Giovanni is probably young enough to be my son, the answer is yes, he is, by those weird coincidences and the fact that it's a very small world. As it happens, Giovanni went to university with my son, which is it's kind of weird doing this with Giovanni. But anyway, let's kick off, and I want to start here with "I'm Not a Number." Many of you, of course, remember the famous program "The Prisoner," where this term came into being. So I thought it was a good starting point. We'll start off here. I'm not a number. I think it's quite interesting because local authority benefits services, particularly around housing benefits, and even some of the other areas, have generally thought of themselves as a wider service. Largely that's because of the amount of work that it generates, and of course also because things like housing benefits have been extremely important to people who claim them and been a critical part of their incomes. But in reality, housing benefits as a service has been largely more a transactional service. There's been much more emphasis around those huge numbers of claimants who are claiming, say, in very large numbers. And of course, what tends to happen is that as a transactional service, that usually means that claims pile up on your desk or on the desk of the assessors, and the assessors have been handling them. And what also comes out of that is all the additional elements of this kind of transactional processing, the customer contact, the calls, the putting things right that are wrong, the searching for things that appear to be right that are wrong, the government's changing on a whim of legislation and all of that stuff. And of course, what we tend to do is we rely very much on IT services, or certainly systems, to be able to handle those large amounts of claim, all of that processing. And of course, what comes out the other end is another big pile of paper in the terms of notifications that claimants don't read, and reports and statistics and all of that good stuff that those of you who work in this kind of field are more than familiar with. There has, of course, been a trend these days to start to design the systems themselves, the way in which we're helping people by designing the IT first, starting with the IT and then working back to those claimants, to those numbers, designing systems that can handle all of those big number of applications and the outputs. Universal credit, of course, one might argue, is a prime example of this, which is clearly had the IT designed before they really thought very clearly about leaning the legislation behind it. So we're really starting to think backwards in terms of the way that we work these systems out. And of course, the reliance on IT on the front line creates another interesting dynamic. So what we're seeing in general these days is that universal credit and also some of the traditional legacy benefits are becoming more concentrating on those big numbers. So we're kind of just looking at people as a commodity, as a single, we're looking for the lowest common denominator in which to deliver those services. And we kind of use legislation and rules to kind of enforce that legislation or those rules. So an example is the claimant commitment is now pretty much hardwired into traditional benefits and equally into universal credit, and it's a very tight contract, but it is what you would expect to see within big, heavy, numbered transactional processing. But it does mean that something else kind of happens. In order to deal with those large number of claimants, we have to accept that if we were to chart this out, a large number of claimants may be able to cope, but a small number of claimants start to need help. And of course, the level of that help, whether it's just some assistance or specialist help, falls somewhere along that line. And this is also being shown to us or starting to come into the system, because what we're seeing is the growth of discretionary payments. So when we think about housing benefits, we have discretionary housing payment. And so those discretionary benefits are there to look at those people who need the specialist help. And that moves away from that transactional processing. People cease to become those numbers and start to become more individuals. So, as I say, these discretionary funds, we have all of these people as numbers, and the discretionary funds means that we start to think of them as individuals. And of course, some of them are quite quirky individuals, and we have to look at these. So these discretionary funds now are appearing all over the place. They range from topping up housing benefit with the DHPs, where the claimant has circumstances that fall outside of those standard rules, and such as a need for an extra bedroom or additional bedrooms, or sometimes that's to assist people into work, and there's funding for if they're in a crisis, and there's also funding built around preventing children getting into poverty. And most of that seems wonderful, but most of these pots of money are quite small or restricted, and they won't address everyone's requirements. So what we're starting to see now across the country is a more sensible approach to manage these discretionary funds alongside each other, and therefore maximising the limited funds to achieve the best outcomes for the individuals. And this means that councils working in these kind of restrictions start to cease seeing the claimant and their household just as the numbers, but looking at them in their round across services. And that doesn't just rest within councils, it's right across the board. People at this lower end, the vast majority being dealt with as numbers, but those with those specialist needs and need for support are being seen much more in the round, and much more in the round by services. I've used the old Alan Hull song, that those of you who are old like me rather than young like Giovanni will probably remember the Lindisfarne song, "We can swing together if we feel we're doing it right, and we can swing together, we can swing all through the night." Though of course swinging does have some other connotations that we won't even think about at this point in time. So multi-agency, and this is what we're seeing, a lot more multi-agency work, particularly looking at these smaller budgets and making certain that they're getting to the right people, because those people who need that support are usually being dealt with by numerous agencies. So according to the Oxford English Dictionary, the USA version, which I would have thought should have been the Oxford American Dictionary, but anyway, it describes multi-agency as involving cooperation between several organisations, especially in areas such as crime prevention, social welfare programmes, or research. And of course, we often hear of a multi-agency conference. So for local authorities, the utilising of these funding streams is creating, just bear with me, I can't see my screen, is creating the multi-agency work between services. And that's going across different tiers of local councils and with social housing, job centres, charities, not-for-profit organisations as well. And so if we think of these things, we can immediately think of, universal support delivered locally is a prime example. The work being carried out by these USDL pilots are pretty impressive by their scope, but they could only be achieved by the pooling of resources. That's funding, budgets, and strategic objectives. And while most USD trials had a job centre involvement, the additional partners outside of these, outside of the job centre and outside the local authority were quite extensive. In particular, if you look at, say, places like Argyll and Bute or Northumberland and South Tyneside, doing really interesting work across groups and a whole range, including healthcare. But there are others, such as in Lincolnshire, where they were working with the prison service to work with getting prisoners back into the community and finding work. And whilst these schemes were targeting digital skills and budget management in terms of the scope of them, they quickly expanded in scope and took in other areas such as emotional support and debt management and a whole range of basic skills and all sorts of things. And whilst no one likes the term troubled families, it is an example where social housing, social services, education and the local police work together to change the behaviour of families that have a whole range of difficulties. So let us consider the men from the ministry, what they're after. What does government say? Why is government quite keen on this? So they're very keen because they like big data analytics. They published a report in October 2013 for a strategy for UK capability in this area. But the concept of big data has been around for years. Most organisations now understand that if they capture all the data streams into their businesses, they can apply analytics and get significant value from it. And even in the 1950s, back in the day when the men from the ministry were on the radio, decades before anybody uttered that term big data, businesses were using basic analytics, essentially numbers in a spreadsheet that were manually examined to uncover insights and trends. And the new benefits that big data analytics brings to the table are speed and efficiency. Whereas a few years ago, a business would have gathered information, run analytics, and unearthed information that could be used for future decisions. Today, that business can identify insights for immediate decisions and the ability to work faster. And that's generally true also of delivering services and targeting things like financial support. And government is really keen on the concept, so much so that it has a number of programs to open up government and local government data to the masses. Now, it's very keen on the idea of data sharing and the use of multiple databases from multi-agencies to target support. But ministers are always genuinely surprised when they get told that the laws they have passed to allow it are still ignored by data protection officers. But it is another way in which multi-agency services can be joined up and you could get more bang for your buck. So the whole thing about big data is it reverses all of that stuff that I said earlier about recognizing people, including quirky families, as being individuals. And we have to convert everybody back into numbers. So we have to reverse that process. So everybody ends up back into that pile of numbers, and we see those numbers, or the computers see those numbers, and we analyze it for patterns. And Giovanni will talk a bit more about this in his section. But that's what we're looking for. And the whole purpose of turning everybody back into numbers and looking through all of those numbers for those patterns is so that we can find the individuals and the households that need specific assistance. And they may even help some people. We've been doing quite a lot of this, or seeing quite a lot of this done. We may even help some people find a job. You know, some people who are out of work, who are used to working, but are now find themselves unemployed and need to find a new job. It is big data in policy and in practice. So I'm now going to hand you over to Giovanni, who will take you through the concept of what numbers can tell you. And just bear with me for a minute whilst I give Giovanni the keyboard. Okay, Giovanni, you have the keyboard.
Welcome. Okay, perfect. Just testing it. Oh, yeah. Okay, hi everyone, and thank you, Malcolm. Just a quick introduction before I kick things off. As Janet said, I'm an analyst at Policy and Practice. I've been in this role for over a year now, and my brief here at Policy and Practice is precisely the analysis of large data set that local authority has, specifically on the residents claiming benefit, housing benefit, and council tax supports. And when Malcolm asked me to share my experience and my perspective as an analyst on the value that big data has within the framework of multi-agency, I was really pleased to do so, because this is actually a topic that I'm very invested in my day-to-day work life here at Policy and Practice. I can say very easily that out of the over a dozen projects that I completed from the start till the end with local authorities, the one I found most interesting and most importantly, I think that local authorities have found most value out of, were projects that involved some sort of multi-agency cooperation, what Malcolm defined multi-agency conference, specifically in this case, data sharing exercises among different, whether it was different departments in the same local authorities, or sometimes even different organizations working and providing support within the same local area. And this is exactly what I would like to talk to you about very briefly today, is just bringing to the table some example of how the data analysis and data sharing exercise can really be very valuable within the context of multi-agency. The first example I want to bring to the table today perfectly exemplifies what Malcolm was talking about before, how we can reverse once more from the numbers to the individual, to the people. The case you see in front of you was drawn from an analysis that we did with a London authority a few months back. We used housing benefit, council tax data. We combined it with data from the housing stock on rent arrears and from the revenue department on council tax arrears, together with data on discretionary payments. These were DHPs, troubled families, or Section 17 payments. So this is a case of a single woman. She's 49. She lives with her 5 children in a 5-bedroom private rented property in N17 in North London. She pays a rent of £381 per week, and she's out of work. She would be entitled to a housing benefit that would cover her entire rent, so £381 of housing benefit, if she was exempt from the cap, the benefit cap. However, due to this reform, she only receives £80 per week. Hence, her shortfall is of £300 per week, her shortfall in the housing benefit versus the rent. We were able to identify that this household had received 4 short-term DHPs to help pay for temporary accommodation. These awards were of £295 per week for a total of 41 weeks. So I think this specific example really helps understand how detailed numbers and information can provide a more comprehensive picture on the household, on the individual. And I think from here, the implication from your organization and your partner organization are evident. In this specific case, perhaps we're facing a case of severe hardship. The lone parent, she's out of work, so even in terms of the scope or targeting employment support might be limited, but the local authority could ask itself whether the DHPs are perhaps the most effective way and the most sustainable way to support this household. I would say, probably scrapping the cap would be the best option, but unfortunately, none of us here have the power to do that. I'd just like to quickly run through the process whereby we are able to put together this data and provide such insightful information. The backbone of our analysis consists of the single housing benefit extract and council tax support data. These are data sets that each single local authority in the country holds, and they're very, very detailed sources of information. The key factor is that they are very detailed source of information at the household level. What does that mean? That for each household, we are able to understand the general circumstances of the household, the housing situation, their employment status, whether there's any disability in the household, the number of children, whether there's a carer in the household. We combine this very rich source of information with our analytical capability. At Policy and Practice, we developed a software that is capable of modeling the UK fiscal and welfare system in its entirety, both under the current system and universal credit, and it's also able to capture different policy changes that have been announced in the future. This provides us with a very rich basis on which to then conduct our analysis, and most important, crucially, at this point, we are able to merge in data sets from other agency or organization that work together with the local authority. So, for example, and all the more information we're able to collect here. So, I made the example for rent arrears or council tax arrears. The more detailed the picture of the financial circumstances of your resident is. The point I want to make here is that regardless of the process whereby you intend to analyze this data, it's important that, especially those of you who are work in local authorities and are online, understand that you really have access to a gold mine of information, which is the admin data on benefit claimants. And until now, it's just very few exceptions of local authorities that have used this data in a way other than simply processing the claim and feeding it back to the DWP, but in a way that helped deliver support in a more effective way. The first example of how data analysis and data sharing exercise can really improve the way support is delivered is, I want to bring it here, is the case of Your Home Newcastle. So last summer, when right after George Osborne announced his first summer budget with a full Conservative government, and a lot of new reforms were announced, a lot of new cuts to the welfare system were announced. At the same time, in Newcastle, universal credit has started rolling out. So Your Home Newcastle, which is a large arm-length management organization managing around 40,000 properties in Newcastle, felt like this new wave of welfare reform was really posing a significant challenge to both its residents and the ability of its residents to pay rent. So also on the Almo own cash flow. And more importantly, YHN understood that by using data, it was possible to identify those households more at risk of being impacted and perhaps losing the capacity of paying up the rent. And then after identifying, also target support using the data to this specific household. So a very interesting partnership was created together with Newcastle City Council, who were prepared to share the data in order to better support the residents, and ourselves, Policy and Practice, who provided the analytical capability within the context of our welfare reform impact analysis service that we offer to local authorities. YHN has also provided us with other data sets they held on, specifically in this case, on rent arrears. And on the basis of the findings of this analysis, together with Newcastle City Council, the two organizations really designed a strategy to preemptively provide support to those households most in need of, using the data that we provided as the backbone for this type of analysis. The second, another very interesting case that personally, while here working in policy and practice, I always find a very striking example of how things can be done in a creative way using within the framework of multi-agency cooperation is the case of Melton Borough Council. It's a very tiny local authority up in Leicestershire. As you can see, the picture in the front on the right is Melton's Borough Council's new, very modern and shiny council offices, which is also housed of the Citizen Advice Bureau, Job Centre Plus, the local police, and other third-party organizations, together with all the council departments, under the principle that by sharing a space, also the services and the support that can be provided to citizens and residents, it's more effective. And again, here we recall the idea of not just claimants in transaction, but actually dealing with people as people, in fact. The opportunity, the burning bridge of opportunity, almost literally, I would say, for Melton to develop this approach was a fire that burned down the old council offices. And while thinking and planning the restructuring of the not only of the building, but of the council and the service they deliver itself, Melton started sharing, with different departments, started sharing data among themselves to realize that there were only a very limited amount of households, just over 70, that actually needed and asked for the council services in multiple locations. So they realized that by using data, they could identify these households that are most in need. And again, from using the data, so drawing back from the number, they were able to develop a joint up approach together with other third-party organizations in order to deliver support. And yesterday, we had Keith Aubrey, who was a strategic manager at Melton Borough Council. He was here in the office in London, and preparing for this webinar, I asked him, so Keith, in a few words, what's the recipe for the success of the Melton story? And he said, it's the fact that probably there's a culture in the way every single officer in the council works that sees, and it's embedded in our day-to-day routine of seeing people as people and not simply as claimants in transaction. I would now would want to show you an example of how the data, again, that we are able to analyze, but you also, how rich this source of information is. I will pull up a spreadsheet. Malcolm, will I be able to pull up from my screen?
Yeah, let me just change across to you, I think. Hang on a second. Right. You're now the presenter. So you can share your screen. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
We can.
Okay. So what you can see right in front of you is a very comprehensive Excel spreadsheet. This is the final step of the process of analysis that we do at Policy in Practice, but it's nothing more than taking the data that you hold and work on it and reshaping it in a more user-friendly, if you want, although by the look of it, it can still appear quite daunting. I just wanted to give you a quick demonstration of how you can actually utilize this data. Each row that you see here corresponds to a household. The first column contains the housing benefit reference number, which is a uniquely identifier. And this is really important because it allows us to work with anonymized data. So this is a way to overcome some of the legal challenges that we face and we could face by working with personally identifiable information. We simply ask local authorities to remove personally identifiable information and only leave the housing benefit reference number. And the second key aspect of this, of the housing benefit reference number, is that by being uniquely identifying, it allows us to then merge different information into our data sets, always keeping the household level focus. So always looking at the very, very granular picture. The different columns indicates different aspects. So yeah, we have the postcode, the ward, the number of children, their earnings, their household type, age group, the tenure, and whatnot. We then move on to list some of the reforms that our analysis can look at. As you can see, that there's the benefit cap, whether they're affected by the benefit cap, and by how much they're affected. I just would like to quickly flip through one of them. So this is an indicator of whether they're affected or not by the lower benefit cap, which is quite a crucial reform that will become effective very soon, and will probably have a very, very large impact on your household and residents. We can simply filter to show only those cases that, according to our analysis, are affected by the benefit cap. As you can see now, the view went down. We're just showing 1,126 cases. And we can filter sort, and we can actually start sorting these cases from the largest to the smallest amount they're set to lose as the result of the cap. So now we know that the first, we can perhaps decide to target supports for the first 100 or 20 cases, and we simply can isolate them and scroll back to the housing benefit reference number, pull this back within your system, whether you use Capita, Northgate, or Civica, and obtain the information needed, full information. Another defining aspect of our analysis is the ability to calculate the cumulative impact of welfare reform. So by summing up all the reforms that have already become effective and that will become effective soon. And we then categorize households in different groups, so whether they have a low, medium, or high impact. We're interested in looking at households that have a high impact, so that are set to lose more than £30 per week as the result of welfare reform. Again, we can filter these households just to show the one that have high impact. Our analysis is also able to infer what barriers to work these households might face. We have an indicator. This is this score is being built on the basis of whether the households there's disability in the households, or there's a young children, or the house is made up of a lone parent. So in order to target employment support to those households with high impact, we want to reach to the low-hanging fruit. So those with high impact of welfare reform and perhaps with low identified barriers to work. Again, we can select low here, and the sample, as you can see, went down by significantly. And then among these households, we want to look at the ones that are not already in work. So we go back to the beginning, the column economic status tells us whether they are in work or not. And again, we select the ones that are not in work for other reasons. And by doing that, we're able to drill down the number of cases to a very limited number. And you can certainly gauge what the implication, the operational implication of being able to have this type of information in your day-to-day work are. I'm just moving. Flicking through. At policy in practice, we're currently working on Malcolm,
Yes, I've taken it back. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry about that. It's just flicking through the slides on your computer. What you see right in front of you is an early look at a new service we are developing for a council in London. The idea is that while the analytical report that we produce is useful for managers making strategic decisions, and the data set that you just saw is useful in making operational decisions, putting the two together is much more engaging. So what you see is, in fact, is a screenshot of an analytical dashboard, an online application in which you'll be able to upload the data and see the information in real time in front of you. The visuals here show households that will be affected by the lower benefit cap. We're hovering over households with 3 children, and we can see that they're in work. And if employment support was targeted to them, they might actually be a quick win if they worked enough hours to qualify for working tax credits and therefore qualify for an exemption to the cap. The filters on the left, as you can see, allow us to just show the households that are quick wins or not. With this new product we're developing, your teams will be much more likely to act upon the information. So one final point I'd like to make is that data analysis is not the silver bullet for all issues, but surely it provides the backbone for any type of really well-targeted intervention. especially when the intervention is targeted at a large number of residents. And another very important point, especially within the context of multi-agency framework, is that insights expands together with, in the context of a multi-agency approach. The more information we're able to put together from different organizations, the more insightful, the most value you can get out of the data. So if you have any questions about your data, how to use your data, or the services that we provide at Policy in Practice, just drop us an email at hello@policyininpractice.co.uk, and we'll get back to you. Now I'll give the floor back to Malcolm. Thank you.
Thank you much, Giovanni. Yeah, before we look at the burning deck of opportunity, there's probably a couple of points that need to be made. I mean, multi-agency work, once you've got that kind of data and sharing data, multi-agency work does require a lot of cooperation between organisations. And in addition to that cooperation, there has to be a lot of strategic objectives. So it is quite important that as multiple agencies come together, there's a clear lead on what's happening. The objectives that everybody wants is clear and defined. That there's good governance across the piece, rather than just people coming together just to do this on a bit of a whim. And of course, managing resources, budgets, and all of that kind of thing, particularly deciding where and how and what, is all quite important. And when you're running a multi-agency team, you need to have a fair bit of clarity and cooperation. But of course, the key thing is everybody wants to do it. So all of those things don't become a problem. You only start to get problems usually back within the individual organisations trying to square some circles. But on the whole, from what I've seen of multi-agency work that is targeting help specifically for individuals, it can be done, and when it is done, it is very effective. Now, just very quickly, we've called this one the burning deck of opportunity, and that's because particularly around the data sharing side of things, there are some issues that need to be considered. And universal credit and therefore the demise of SHIBI is certainly going to be one of those problems. As people migrate onto universal credit, then those details will no longer be available through SHIBI. I mean, it is pretty critical that as a group, we influence the DWP to release the relevant universal credit data to help us work more effectively across multi-agency work, which is the kind of thing that is happening at Croydon through the projects there. There is also an issue about data protection prevarication. You know, the underpinning of data, sharing of administrative centres as well. That becomes quite important, and what we did find, certainly when we were looking at universal support delivered locally, is that data protection officers often offer up barriers that don't exist rather than just in their minds. You know, there is law on sharing of data for specific outcomes, particularly in delivering areas like benefits. There is an element of wanting to secrete data rather than sharing it. And public opinion tends to show that the public likes the idea of sharing data as long as it is not intrusive or improper. I mean, proper use is finding fraud, it's finding other people's error, and it's not having to fill in lots of forms with the same information. And that's what the public feel is proper use. Improper use, of course, is finding their fraud and their errors, or knowing that you're paying for Sky, but not the council tax. So, you know, people can be a bit picky sometimes when it doesn't play out in their favour, but on the whole, people are really quite in favour of it. Anything that makes everything more efficient. it is kind of ironic that devolution will probably create some additional data objections, because we'll probably end up going back to step one with new organizations, new departments, all having an argument for why they need to retain their information and their knowledge, because after all, knowledge is power, and not wanting to broker their intelligence. But if projects are in place around multi-agency working now, the data side shouldn't be a problem, because there'll be no going out, and multi-agency programs clearly do have results, and good results. And on that basis, because I think the future is multi-agency work, I'm going to put a question to you guys, perhaps that you can answer afterwards, which is, how's your role? What is your role in all of this? So, on that basis, over to you, Janet. Have we still got Janet?
Thanks, Mark.
Yep.
Yes, no, I'm still here. Sorry, I was muted and I'm now unmuted. I just have one question, and I think it's just pulling together pretty much what has already been covered, I do think. But just to reiterate, what do you think are the main challenges when dealing with data and multi-agencies?
Giovanni, do you want to answer?
Well, yeah, from my personal experience, I think one of them, Malcolm has already explained very well, is sort of the legal challenges in sharing data. There's certain legal departments in local authority which are a bit more stubborn than others in allowing to share data, and even within the same local authority and within different departments can be a challenge. But I think personally, the biggest challenge I face is when you probably see yourself in front of an organization that it's quite reluctant to change the way things are done. So perhaps the data is there and the information is there, but because of certain cultural or reluctant to change the culture in the day-to-day approach in the way how services are delivered, that can represent the biggest challenge. And as Malcolm strongly emphasized right after my presentation, it's the manner and defining clear objectives from the outset of any type of multi-agency cooperation is the key, because just joining data for the sake of it and a whim won't really bring much benefit in itself.
Yeah, and I guess I don't really have very much to add to that. I mean, I think there are some genuine barriers to sharing data when it is improper or whatever. But as long as you're clear on why you're doing it, and also you're properly registered under the Data Protection Act, it shouldn't be a barrier. But it is interesting. I met with Lord Freud recently, and he was complaining bitterly that he felt there should be more data sharing going on, and didn't really understand that having passed legislation to do it. But of course, actually, one of the major contributors to this kind of debate tends to be the DWP, who don't want to share data with anybody. So it's always going to be a battle we're going to have. I mean, it's interesting to note that there are more data protection laws due to come in, but I guess it depends on where we go with Brexit. We could see all data protection laws thrown out at the end of this. Who knows? Okay, we do have a question here from Anthony Scarf for you, Giovanni. Anthony asks, how do you go about analysing the barriers to work? Does this information come from housing authorities, Job Centre Plus, or employment providers, or somewhere else?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. So the barriers to work, the analysis we do on barriers to work is based on the information that we find in the housing benefit extract. So the data set that's is held by each single local authority. So as with any other aspect of our analysis, the barriers to work that are identified are as accurate as the data that is reported in there. We surely probably joining up this data with sources from Job Center Plus would probably provide a clearer picture of what the real barriers to work are. But I think that assessing someone's barriers to work on the basis of disability, like we do, or the presence of a young children, or carer responsibilities, could be a good starting point to categorize each resident on a barriers to work score. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a follow-up, Anthony, just type it into the box. Martin O'Neill wants to ask a question. I'm going to have a go at opening up his line for him. If not, he's typed his question. Hi, Martin. Can you hear me?
Hi, Malcolm. Yes, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, you're very clear. Do you want to put your question?
It wasn't so much a question. It was just really I wanted to echo what you've said about the power of multi-agency working, because you probably remember that we worked very closely with Policy and Practice in Birmingham. I'm not there anymore, but we set up a very, very strong multi-agency welfare reform committee back in 2013. We got together the Job Centre Plus, DWP, law centres, RSLs, various council departments, local charities, and we had it chaired by one of our cabinet members. So it had all the governance arrangements in place, it had objectives set out from the onset, and what we wanted to do was to make the best of a bad deal in terms of bringing in the welfare reforms in Birmingham. We used a lot of analysis from Policy and Practice with Devon. Giovanni wasn't there at the time, I don't think, and it helped us to target our support from that multi-agency committee in the different arms and membership who were there, and I think we made a really, really good outcome in terms of bringing in those welfare reforms, which obviously were not popular, but we limited the damage through that cross-sector working. I do remember the first day we were all sat there looking at each other and all probably thinking the same thing, this is not going to work, but it really did work, and it's the most powerful thing that I've ever done in local government, and I would echo the success of it and what both you and Giovanni have said so far today.
Thank you very much, Martin. I also recall, in addition to that project, I mean, Birmingham has done a number of multi-agency projects which have been quite effective, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've done mapped out the analysis for who's likely to be impacted by the higher benefit cap and future welfare reforms, and it really does work. It helps us to get a much bigger picture of what's going on, rather than sitting in the silo of the benefit service, just looking at what information we can get out of the Northgate system, which is questionable because it's only as good as what people put into it.
Yeah, absolutely true. Thank you very much, Martin. That's great input. Thank you. Yes, Anthony's come back and said, thank you, Giovanni. Yes, data from JCP, DWP or employability providers would help to target employment support. Peter asks about the barriers to work, in particular for carers, disabilities and children under 5. Do you have a view on that, Giovanni?
What specifically? Well, again, all the information that we use to classify the barriers to work, it's there in the SHIBI, and that's the information on which each housing benefit claimant reports in order to calculate their entitlement.
Yes. And Peter was putting that forward as not as a question, but as an explanation that these are the sorts of things that you use. Sorry, Peter, I misunderstood that. If anybody else has got any questions, they can type them into the question box, or if you want to raise your hand, I'll open the line and you can put the questions. So, Janet, they're all very quiet. So they're all thinking about this.
Everybody's had a lot to think about. It's been a fantastic session, very detailed session. Yeah, so I think we've given people a lot to think about. I'm conscious that we're coming up to the time, Malcolm.
Yes, I agree. But we will answer Jade Alsop's question here. How long does it take to do the analysis?
So from the moment we receive the data from a local authority and the other data, potentially, hopefully, other data from partner organizations, it takes us within 6 to 8 weeks usually to turn it around into a very detailed report and into that spreadsheet that you've just seen.
Okay, thank you very much. So over to you, Janet.
Great. Well, listen, thank you very much, everybody. Like I say, a lot to talk about there, and we have recorded the session, which will be sent on to you for you to take a listen back at or flick to any particular points and share with colleagues as well. And just for future, for further information, please do take a look at the Welfare Reform Club website, welfarereformclub.net, and also the Policy and Practice website, policyandpractice.co.uk. And as Giovanni said, email hello@policyandpractice.co.uk if you want to see a one-to-one data set walkthrough. The team will be very happy to talk in more detail with you. So it just remains to say thank you very much to Malcolm and to Giovanni, and indeed to everybody who's taken part today and those who've asked questions. It's been a great session, and I hope you have an enjoyable rest of the day. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.